Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Retail Corner podcast. I am joined today by Tony Paixao. He is the uh, Vice President of Investigative Platforms, which is a fancy title, but it's all right. Vice President of Investigative Platforms over at Verensics. Tony, welcome to the Retail Corner, man.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here. And you got my last name right. That was impressive.
It was. I had a little help. So,
First pass, it just stuck there long enough for you to be able to say it. Well done.
Yeah. It'll work. It'll work. So, for those of you who don't know you, I mean, you have a kind of a storied past, an awesome past within Wicklanders Lasky, within investigations, within Harbor Freight. Can you kind of give a little bit of your CV?
Yeah, sure. Started in law enforcement, went to James Madison in Virginia. And I interned with NCIS when I was at JMU, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and I
just
loved
drop
it.
that in. Yeah,
well, it leads into I ended up working for NCIS. So I was law enforcement with UVA for almost 2 years, and then got on with NCIS as a special agent with them. Did family sexual violence investigations. Realized within about 6 months that was not what I wanted to be doing. Most of my caseload was child pornography investigations and child sex offenders. And it just, I was 25 at the time, and it was not what I could envision kind of projecting my life out and doing day in and day out. So I made the decision to leave, which brought me into the private sector. Went over to Harbor Freight Tools. I ended up within about a year working up into a regional loss prevention manager with them. That was a wild west. We had less than 500 stores at the time, and it was just me and one other investigator doing the interviews for the first few months. And now it's a massive team, an amazing team. And the company is...
I've got friends on the team. It's a great team.
Yeah. The company is just, it's growing like crazy. So they have all the right ingredients and they're doing all the right things. So that was a really great experience. That was retail. I mean, and your listeners know retail is coming over from the government and going into retail. It was like going into a foreign language school. Like there's so many acronyms and there's so many different things that you really need to just kind of sit back and soak in so that you can actually be a value added partner. And that took some time, but it was an incredible experience being over at Harbor Freight. So I did that for about 5 years. And then ended up coming on with WZ and did so many different things. A part of the company when COVID hit and we were challenging everything and changing everything and bringing everything over to evidence-based principles and practices. So was fortunate to be a part of that ride and was able to work with IAI, the International Association of Interviewers, and kind of help do the same type of principle with that organization. And then I wanted to make a change and kind of spread my wings outside of interviewing specifically, get into the tech side of the business, and came over to Verensics for the next chapter. So here we are. Yeah.
It's good stuff. Yeah. And so you mentioned evidence-based practices and forensics a little bit. And so how is that? That's a big piece of forensics, right?
Yeah. I would say, and it was also my kind of fix on this concept of like evidence-based anything really started when I was over at WZ. And then going through school, I went and went to grad school during COVID. And the idea of why do we do what we do has kind of always been written into how I process things, but
sure.
Understanding like why do we do what we do when we're applying that on a professional platform is really, really important. And I think in retail, just as much as any other industry, a lot of times it's very easy to fall into doing things because we've done them. And when you go and you ask your boss or you ask like the leadership at the organization, why exactly do we do it this way? And if they look a little puzzled and they're like, well, because we've always done it that way and no one's ever asked us otherwise, then that's when my, antenna started going off and wanting to figure out, the answers to those questions. So evidence-based practices is that it's having some type of credible research supported fundamentals that are rooted in why and defining why you do what you do. So from a liability perspective, it's good because you could say, hey, it's not just me doing this, it's me doing this because this, and this is supported by these components. But also from an efficacy standpoint, it's good because it works, right? And it's been proven in general. Yeah.
That's the first gate. It has to work. It has to be applicable to the to what you're doing. Absolutely.
That's right, man. Yeah, it's got to work. There's a lot of things out there that are not quite as effective, and right. I'm sure there's a lot of evidence to prove that too. But yeah, the things that do work.
So talking about interviewing, talking about evidence based, talking about the motivations behind what people are doing, and with so much information rolling around in the internet, with it seems like we're informed about our companies before our companies sometimes, and with the idea of companies and trust, I could go into several different companies that have lost trust recently, but I don't want to pull all that string. But you recently talked about like the trust in the workplace, and you talked about Dr. Henry Cloud's book, and you talked about how the principles of trust. Are you seeing those principles of trust roll out through the company, and how people feel about their company?
Yeah, I think it's been something that's kind of always been around for employees of making sure that they feel safe and they feel comfortable with the organizations that they work within. From my perspective, from an investigative capacity, the trust component is a really important one, and it's important on really two sides of the coin. So you've got the kind of the perpetrators, if you want to call them that, the individuals that you're investigating. And then also everybody on the peripheral of that. So like the witnesses and the victims and any type of, associates. But then you've also got the investigations teams and their trust within each other and their trust with the organization that they have their best interests and, that you're going to be working for this company and you're going to be taken care of and supported, and you can see some longevity and project out. And so I think that the concept of trust in the workplace, I don't necessarily think it's a new thing. I think it's something, though, that the more people have access to understanding what they should be looking for and the type of treatment they should be getting, and kind of setting their expectations to those standards, and with access to pretty much everybody at this point with social media and being able to see, sometimes that's definitely a negative, but I think people have been able to identify this job that I have isn't necessarily the job that I have to stay in for my entire career because there's no other options. And it doesn't matter how they treat me. It doesn't matter how,
everybody's got options nowadays.
How much I enjoy my work. Right. Yeah. So you're having people look for more than just a paycheck. You're having people look for something deeper. And I think that component is much more alive and well in today's workforce than it's ever been. So the idea of trust and people understanding what that is and knowing what to look for beyond the superficial is critical, and it's a game changer with your experience with your employer.
That makes sense. So, like, given the retail environment and everything, there's a lot of sentiment around the us them kind of mentality when it comes to loss prevention, when it comes to asset protection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those LP guys are out to get us, but that's not the case 99 times out of 100. And so how would you, as a leader of LP, as a leader of investigations, how would you step into a situation and immediately bolster trust within and break down those silos?
Yeah. Oh, you got Charlie making an appearance.
Nothing wrong with a cat.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So I think a couple things that you mentioned there. So this, like, the optics problem that people talk about in loss prevention, the us versus them, and these are the bad guys coming in. And we see the same thing in law enforcement, within the community of us versus them. They have a very siloed understanding of what it means to be in loss prevention. And it's generally based on the perceptions they've had with negative interactions. So their idea of what an LP agent is, or what an LP manager, or I would argue the same in a lot of cases, unfortunately, with HR, anyone that has any type of capacity where they may be firing somebody or have to do some type of disciplinary action, those negative memories are going to be much more strongly correlated, unfortunately, with the perception of that person's position.
Right.
So I think the first thing, and what I've seen the most effective leaders doing, is addressing kind of the elephant in the room, addressing that the job of a loss prevention manager, the job of a law enforcement officer or special agent is not all punitive. It's not all to go in and to control and to punish and to investigate acts of wrongdoing. A lot of it, I would argue, the most successful ones are based on the relationships, building successful relationships with all levels up within the organization, within the community. And in order to do that, you have to be more than just kicking in doors, firing people, doing the interviews and interrogations.
Sure. Yeah.
It needs to be more of like a genuine vested interest in the person that you're working with and the people that you work for. And that's kind of going back to that trust concept, is genuinely building it. Yeah.
I realized I was doing something wrong earlier in my career when I was an investigator and I would do interviews and everything else. And I would call the store manager and she'd go, "Okay, Cole, who is it this time?"
Yeah, man.
Like, "Oh, I only call you for this, don't I? I need to call you for more things. I need to call you." All right.
There's so many stories like that. Like somebody showing up to a loss prevention officer showing up to a store and he's got a particular tie on. And every time he wears that tie, he only wears it when he's doing interviews. So people start to correlate and associate that green tie's on Joey.
Ooh, yeah.
People are getting fired today. So people pay attention to those things. If you work in a single store, or even if you're multi-unit and you home office out of a store, if the only time you have people in your office is to interview them, then anytime somebody gets called to your office, you're going to have a direct negative association with being in Tony's office. So
you're going to crank up that drama. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So creating positive associations outside of just the negative, it needs to be an intentional effort. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about social media. You talked about different kind of like the openness of tools that we have at our disposal now. Like, are you seeing any like strategic opportunities coming around the bend with the investigative process through the use of technology?
I mean, good Lord, there's so many.
That's a big question. I know.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many opportunities and resources that are available now that weren't even available 6 months ago. And you've got to keep your ear to the floor with it to really stay on top of it and stay ahead. I think the biggest one, though, is just kind of on a more systemic level, is within retail specifically, is having leaders that are open-minded to technology. A lot of times this has been an industry, retail in general, and I think you can make the same claim for law enforcement, where people are comfortable with what they know. And when you've got an area of the business that is always changing at such an aggressive pace, it can be overwhelming and intimidating. So having leadership within the organization that's open and very proactively interested in learning what can we bring into our business from a technology perspective that can help us do our jobs more efficiently and that can help us save money and create revenue streams. And there's a lot there now, again, that investigators can kind of tap into. For me, as a shameless plug, being with Verensics, that's exactly what Verensics has done. Is they've tapped into the utilization of artificial intelligence when it comes to aggregating information and being able to scale the amount of human intelligence. So information you're getting from boots on the ground, the people that are actually in your stores, in your DCs, in your corporate offices, whatever the field venue may look like, being able to collect that information at scale, to aggregate that data and to present it in dashboard format so that you can make informed decisions as to what do you need to do next from an investigative perspective. That concept never existed before I even, I mean, honestly, before I even heard of what this company was to this level. So that's one of hundreds of examples that you could probably go off on about, tech that's available now that wasn't available 5 years ago.
So I'm going to ask you a very specific question, just because I'm kind of a linguistics nerd and everything else.
Okay.
And it is also this is a podcast in 2024, and so if I don't use the words AI, I somehow I get delisted. And so here's my question: given the evolving process of AI and just the amount of information that's out there, have you seen like the principles of forensic linguistics being applied to more online content to figure out like who's doing the writing behind blogs, or actually who's doing anything like that? Are you seeing investigative platforms or evidence-based practices around the use of linguistics given the amount of data?
It's a really interesting question. To be honest, I think that's outside of my lane to be able to speak to intelligently. I don't know specifically as to how AI is being applied to be able to detect when maybe the validity of documents that's being that are being submitted or created, if it's created by the actual individual, if the video is the actual person. I know that the technology exists. I just don't know to the extent, or really
with deep fakes and everything else. Is the cadence of this person matching the cadence of who it's supposed to be? That kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and so given kind of with that rolling around in your brain, can you kind of share an example of a time when you have combined technology, that's a little more cutting edge and that had a particularly successful outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what direction we want to go with it. I think that when you're looking at, let's take any particular investigation. So let's take it back to the conversation that we were having earlier of this idea of getting information from people. So
Sure.
a traditional way to get information from people, and I would argue a very effective way to get information from people, would be to ask them, right? So yes, I know,
novel,
novel concept, but to have a conversation, and those conversations are never going to be replaced, and they're always going to be absolutely critical and vital. However, a lot of times information that you need from people doesn't necessarily warrant a conversation. It's not to the level of needing a one-on-one type interaction. So if you need to collect a lot of what I would argue would be generalized or surface level information, being able to utilize some type of technology to capture that information so it can better inform your decision as to when I have a sit down face-to-face conversation with that individual, that would be a recent example. And that's exactly what I'm involved with right now with Verensics. That's what that is leveraging technology to scale the amount of human intelligence that you're actually able to capture and sift through, so that you can make an informed decision as to what you need to do next, and more importantly, who you really need to sit down and have those face-to-face conversations with. There's a whole laundry list of other ways. I would argue in just about every type of investigative capacity, investigators, whether it's in retail or whether it's in law enforcement, they're leveraging some type of technology that they did not have access to. I would argue even 5 years ago, whether that's,
I would hope nobody's out there.
I don't know if you've had anybody on and interviewed them about this, but open source investigations is one thing that comes to mind. So open source investigations is when you are trained and very seasoned in how to scour the publicly sourced information that's on the internet to learn about the person that you're investigating. So people put everything out there online, or a lot of people do. And even those people that think they're pretty savvy and clever, the ones who are good at open source investigations, they have a very keen ability to still find certain little kernels of information and kind of build a puzzle around who this person really is and may be before they go into the face-to-face interview.
Oh yeah, everybody's got that friend that you could be like, okay, I need to know more about this person, and within 20 minutes they're like, oh yeah, this is their whole history.
Yeah, so take that person on steroids, someone who's actually gone through a professional training on how to do it. It is honestly, it's kind of terrifying, the amount of information that you can actually find. And picture 10 years ago, for sure, the ability to be able to have so much information and data on the person that you're investigating outside of just like, boots on the ground collecting it or like going in and having conversations with people, but being able to do it and gather it all from a computer is just mind blowing. The amount of data that you can get to inform those cases. So yeah, I mean, so many different cool toys out there now that make investigators' job a lot easier.
I could do a whole series on that. Just a different random little tips and tricks. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
But okay, I kind of want to I want to pick your brain a little bit on maybe your more personal opinions on a couple things.
Okay.
So yeah, you're with Verensics. Verensics is entrepreneurial in nature, and you moving over and starting this new career that kind of has an entrepreneurial like leaning to it,
Yeah, kind of.
And so, where do you think that spirit comes from? Because you're working with entrepreneurs now. You're working with it's a well-seeded company. It's 7 years old, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And but is there still that spirit? Is there still that entrepreneurial spirit?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, that's the exciting part about it. And honestly, the company WZ that I was with before, it had a similar feel to it, where you sit down with Dave Zulawski and you have a glass of scotch with the leadership of the organization, and you just brainstorm ideas and come up with concepts. Like that is that entrepreneurial spirit of always just being hungry and interested. This company is that times many, many more because it's small, right? They have a small footprint right now, but their technology is so incredible, and the product that they have is the potential has not even come close to being recognized yet, which is why this is a really exciting time to jump over and be a part of it with them. But I think the entrepreneurial aspect of it is just, I like the opportunity to be able to have conversations with people that have real teeth and real skin in the game, and being able to take those risks and being able to have the discussion of what are we actually trying to do with this product, and what risks are we willing to take to get there, and do we want to do it the right way, right? So when you're working with people that check all those boxes, they have an incredible product, they have an incredible business mindset and business intelligence, and they have a moral compass, which is, the fundamental lifeblood of making sure this is done the appropriate way. That was kind of the magnet that attracted me to
it makes sense.
Coming over and doing this and taking this risk and having fun with this kind of chapter in my career.
So talking about new opportunities, I would be amiss if I didn't bring up you're actually you're partnering with the brilliant Jennifer Crawford, and yes, and you guys are starting a podcast, right?
Yeah. So we started. We announced it back in January. I've wanted to do a podcast for 5 years, and it kind of floated around like the exact topic of what I wanted it to focus on. But Jen and I always talk about our jobs and our days. And she was a therapist. She worked at a private practice. Now she's a therapist at a school. And our conversations were always very different, but they always arrived really at the same kind of conclusions. And it was us just challenging the behaviors behind why people did the things that they did. And so we settled on this idea of why don't we have a podcast that's focused on the overarching topic of psychology, which there's so many things that fall within that, but make it practical. So things that people hear about all the time. So understanding like the guy we just interviewed on Monday was about obsessive compulsive disorder. He's a professor out of Harvard Medical School for psychiatry, and he runs the OCD Research Institute. And everybody's heard of OCD, but you're like, how does that actually apply to my daily life? And when you listen to the conversation, and you recognize so many people suffer from some element or a type of OCD, and how does that represent itself in daily interactions? How can I better position myself to be able to communicate with people who are struggling with these types of things? Oh, wow. So learning about all these different kind of facets within psychology to make you a better, more informed person, what is the objective of it? And we've got so many cool guests.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I'll be watching.
Yeah. So
And
it's
so,
gonna be great.
like you have that forensic psychology background, right?
Hmm.
And she has that practical counselor, practical
Clinical.
uh,
Yeah.
clinical
Hmm.
background, and so it's kind of finding that middle ground, which is kind of
Yeah,
cool.
it
Yeah,
is. It's funny because like the forensic psych saying that I have like a forensic psych background. I got my master's in forensic psych, but realistically, like somebody who is practicing in forensic psychology, you can have a degree in something and not actually be doing it. And I would
oh
argue
sure.
that's what I'm doing. I don't utilize what a forensic psychologist would be doing. I'm not doing, courtroom evaluations or all the different laundry list of different things that people can get involved with in that capacity. But I still going through that program, and it piqued my interest and my kind of
Sure.
just insatiable curiosity of learning about people. And
Well,
it,
it comes back to the reason why you wanted to know the reason why people do things,
That,
and
honestly, yes, that's always been. I think that's what's put me into every job that I've ever had is, and they've all been in line with one another. Like the criminal side, the retail side, the WZ side, and what I'm doing now. Just about learning how to effectively communicate with individuals, learning the motivations behind why people do what they do, and how you can impact and can't impact that, and doing that in an ethical way.
right.
There's just so much to it that's so fascinating to me.
So here's my last question:
Yeah.
if you had a conversation with yourself, or a conversation with somebody just starting out on their path, you said,
Mm.
you looking back, yours is kind of a straight line, and it didn't seem that way originally, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
yeah, but looking back, it's a straight line to here. If you had to give advice to somebody that's just starting on their journey, that wants to kind of get into, and that wants to find the reason why,
Hmm.
what advice would you give them?
Man, it's such a great question. And it's a question that I would challenge. I would actually say, let's start with that. So if you are just getting started, I would ask yourself, if you were if you were going to give that same advice, what would you say that would be the priority that the individual should consider? So
Hmm.
what about your life do you think you would like to spend the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? What about what makes you happy, what charges you, what energizes you? What do you really want to tap into, and do on a day in and day out basis? And I think not siloing yourself into one prescriptive answer to that question. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, I want to be a police officer, so I'm going to go be
Right.
a cop. It needs to be, I want to be a police officer. And then I would say, pause. What does it mean to be a police officer? So what have you actually learned about the day in the life of a cop is? What have you learned if your goal is, I want to be someday I want to be the director of asset protection for a Fortune 500 company. Okay, that's a great aspiration. So why
There's
do
several
you
steps before that. Yeah.
there's several steps, but why do you want that particular job? Well, because my dad did that and he loved it. Okay, that's great. So we're going to have to figure out how do you get there. But what about that particular job do you actually know? Other than
Hmm.
my dad did it, but what is it actually going to ask of you? And are those things that it's going to ask of you, are those things that you actually would be happy and fulfilled doing? Because a job is so much more than what it looks like on the title. And when you get the
Oh,
title,
absolutely.
yeah, the kind of the allure of it wears off. I remember when I was with NCIS, I thought as a 25-year-old, I was like, special agent with NCIS, this is the
That's
coolest thing
it,
ever.
man.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then 6 months into it, I'm like, I could care less if I have this title. I am miserable. So
Oh,
it's identifying what do you want to do, and then really being true and honest to yourself about why do I want to do it, and recognizing that the life and your options are much bigger than this one particular job. So you can, I would say, directionally focus on what your passions are and what motivates you and what makes you happy and what can fulfill those kind of personal milestones for you. And don't be so laser focused and prescriptive on, I need this particular title with this particular salary in this particular company. So be more open-minded and focus more on what makes you happy, you know?
That's never bad advice, man.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So hey, we're running up against the time limit here, and so I wanted to thank you for coming on the Retail Corner, and we'll have all of your links below.
Good
That's
stuff.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, this is great.
All right, folks. Next time on the Retail Corner, I'll see you there. Bye.
Take care.
If you would like to be featured on our podcast, please email us at podcast@retailcorner.live or visit our website, retailcorner.live. Looking forward to having you as our guest on our podcast, and thank you so much for listening.